Gukesh D has just become the third youngest player in chess history to cross the 2700 barrier and become a Super Grandmaster. So an elite club of players, and he's done it at just 16 years and a month and a half. The only two players ahead of him were Wei Yi and Alireza Firouzja. So he's even done it faster than Magnus Carlsen. Now, he's currently playing in the BL chess tournament. He played this game here against Le Quang Liem, a 2700 Super GM in his own right, and he just really kind of blew him off the board here. So I want to show you this one. I hope you enjoy. Let's see what happened. So we had c4 on the first move, e6, knight c3, and we head back into actually a queen's gambit declined here, and knight f6 takes on d5, takes us into this so-called Carlsbad pawn structure. But after bishop's g5, we don't have some of the quieter moves like bishop e7, c6. Instead, we have bishop b4, more of a Ragozin style way to play. And this is really sharp and aggressive because you give this counter pin, and after e3 from white, you can actually kick this bishop, it dropped back here, and then you can go g5, very aggressive, because now you can land knight e4 and immediately put pressure here. And this is already quite an interesting theoretical moment, because rook c1 was played, but when I was doing some clicking around here, the computer prefers queen to c2. That's actually the most commonly played move as well, because if we then see the moves we saw in the game, so h5 trying to trap that bishop, give it some room like this, knight takes, pawn takes, then c6, bishop d3, knight d7. Well, from here, white can now castle the king, and the king is safer, plus you can actually push e4 faster and get that central pawn majority rolling. That's really key for white's counterplay against the bishop pair here. But what we see in the game, if I come right back here, is rook to c1, which is a decent move, but now you can't castle queenside, of course. So we get the same variation we just saw. This one comes here, bishop d3, knight d7. But here, you know, the king's not safe, and it's a bit harder to arrange e4 as quick as you can in those other variations. Now, if you go knight e2 here, you can kind of start playing some e4 stuff soon, maybe put a question to the bishop first. But instead, g4 was played. It invites black to kick on here, and then g3 as well. So you can't actually take that pawn, of course. Your rook is pinned to it. Equally, you can't push on or you lose a pawn. But the problem with this is black can just sit there. So queen e7 was played, hits that pawn on e3, and actually pretty soon white is forced to take here and then give black a passed pawn to go along with the bishop pair. So black just starts building up these micro trumps in the position a lot faster than white in this game. And we see another one here. So king to d2 is played to hold that pawn and also try and get on the running shoes, and come and hide this way. But now black even has the safer king coming out of the opening. So we had knight b6, looking to jump in here one day, pawn a3 kicked the bishop, it came to d6, and now because it pressures the g3 pawn, we had a release of tension here, but here's the passed pawn I was talking about that white now has to babysit for the rest of the game. So pawn f4 was played, natural move. This space gaining stuff with the pawns is really white's only hope now in this position. So bishop d7, queen f3, and now castles queenside. And this is what I mean, black now gets the safer king as well. So pawn f5 was now played. You could go g5 there, by the way. The computer prefers that one, just keeping your own light squared bishop alive for the time being. Obviously, when you do this, you kind of kill that one. Now we had king to b8, safety first. Knight h3 developed here. But one thing I do want to show you is that if you try e4 in this position, you might be wondering about that one. The problem is c5. And it gets very tactical, but the long and short of it here is that you're blowing up the centre of the board when your king's still in the centre, the rook's lined up, you've got these bishops just ready to spring to life, you know, all sorts of directions. And so even though you can temporarily win a pawn here, your king is getting cut to shreds long term. So that's why e4 wasn't played. The knight developed instead, connected the rooks, and now c5 came anyway. Same ideas here. Gukesh is trying to open the position for his pieces. So pawn f6 was now played, kicked back this queen, it dropped into f8, And now again, this pawn wasn't captured. There's too many problems to open the d file for the rook. So instead g5 was played, rook g8 attacked it, kept that knight tied down to the defence, and now white continues evacuating the king, getting it over, and actually at the cost of a pawn here. So we had captures on d4, takes back, rook c8 coming to that open file, and here we see a tactic to win this pawn. White actually allows it with king to b1, but it was the best move, getting the king out of there before things get even worse. But now Gukesh can play this one. Great move, you pick up a pawn. Because if that one's captured, the queen comes in, and there's too many pieces flooding into the attack essentially. Plus you've got some tactical liabilities on these third ranks. You know, you can imagine if the rooks get swapped here like this, well then this bishop's eyeing this one, if the queen's ever distracted. So here's one sample line, the knight coming back to a2. You could have knight a4 threatening mate, queen f4 check, king moves, queen d2 covers. This is all the best moves when you play this with the engines. But then the rooks come off, takes, and you pick up this knight here. You know, this is a theme of what's going on. So you can't actually take back that bishop on a3. There's too many tactical problems. So instead, knight b5 was played. Best move, hits the bishop. So the bishop actually took this knight. Rook takes on c8 played. The queen recaptured. Bishop takes on b5. And now this one really is hanging. The queen's attacking it as well. So it dropped back to d6. And white dropped their bishop back, maybe looking to hit f5, push the queen to a dark square. So it comes to d7 here, bit more activated. And now white finds an excellent move in this position. There's a problem with this knight. I mean, you want to bring it into the game, but if you do that, you lose this pawn. And equally, if you try and defend the pawn first, well, then black can do this one, block out the rook. It's just not good. And you're attacking the knight in this variation. So that's why we had g6 played here. Just a really nice clearance move, because after the pawn takes, it frees up this square for the knight, and this one is now a passed pawn for white. And here actually black makes a mistake. So Gukesh goes queen a4, activating the queen, hitting this pawn, but white had a fantastic resource here of rook to c1. And the reason this is such a great move is that you actually leave black to take this pawn if they want to do this, because then you can go f7. Now the rook could come to the c file straight away, or let's say it comes to h8, then the knight can come to e6, and this is the key. You pick up a tempo on the queen, and you threaten to queen the pawn here. Now whether the queen comes here or here doesn't make so much difference. The pawn can still go through ultimately, and then you'd have some kind of line like this where white emerges a minor piece up, but for 3 pawns should be a draw with best play. But this was the Klang Liem's best chance to actually stay in the game, try and make a draw here. But he missed this rook c1 idea, giving that pawn if it was wanted. Now that wasn't necessarily going to be taken by Gukesh. He could have gone, say, queen b4, but then it gives a rough equality in this position. But instead, after queen a4, we had knight e6 immediately. Looks really natural, covers the pawn and everything like that. But then we can actually go rook c8 ourselves from black. You stop white from going rook to c1. And now if you advance the pawn, well, queen b4 is quite a nice covering move. The knight could come back to d7. You're actually doing okay in this variation as black. Quite better here. So queen d1 was played, trying to get those queens off. And you can actually take with a decent game and get this pawn running all the way to h2. Then activate this rook, you know, something like this. The knight and bishop are covering adequately here. But instead, Gukesh keeps those queens on the board. Understandable when white's got the more exposed king. So he drops back here. White activates here. And now knight c4 played. And you just can't live with the knight on that square, because there's actually a threat to mate the white king here. I mean, say you took this pawn on h4, well then you can check here, the king can't come to the c file, so it has to come here, and this is actually mate. Or even if the king came to a1, still a checkmate. So that's why we had the bishop chopping on c4, recaptures was played, now the rook took on h4, but this is really tough for white now, because pawn c3 comes, blasting open the king. They're really coming up to time control, and the only move to stay in the game was knight c5 here, blocking off that c file. Although queen b5 threatens mate, yes, you can block it, but then you lose your knight here, pawn recaptures. Now you can check here and all stuff like that, but you can even take. Black's a couple of pawns up, Still got the attack, safer king, you know, difficult for white to hold this, especially in time pressure. But knight c5 was missed, the pawn took, and now the king just gets absolutely cut to shreds here. So we had check on b5, king c2, queen a4, the king came here, and it actually gets forced onto the e-file here. It's unavoidable, you know, if you come here, the queen can come here, all of this sort of stuff. So it comes over this way like this, comes to the e-file, and now a really nice switchback with the rook. You want to bring the rook into the attack, but you can't leave your back rank, then you're actually losing the game now. You know, something like this, discovered check, you're actually losing your queen, no good. So you can't leave the back rank as black, but what we had here was rook e8. You're hitting that knight, two pieces are attacking it, it's pinned to the king, and you just can't avoid losing the piece. So f7 played, rook takes with check, king d2, and now king c7, a nice move, just tucking the king to safety. The bishop still covers the pawn. Rook h7 was tried, threatening to queen with check on the king, but now queen b2, and these checks are actually just deadly. The king's getting given the runaround, it gets forced over to the queen side here, and these were actually the final moves of the game. Queen b1, in fact, here, this is where the Quang Liem resigned, because if you come into c4, then we're checking with b5, this is forced, check from here, and the only thing you can do now is give up a pawn, stave off mate for one more move. So an epic king hunt, and what a player to watch. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see another epic game from Gukesh, click here. Thanks very much for watching, see you soon.